What's going on, webheads, and welcome to day 2 of Spider-Pop's 25 Days of Christmas, Season 4. And today's video is going to be something wicked webtastic, because today we're going over comics. But not just any comics. Moon Knight comics.
Like a butterfly, stinging like a bee. My name's Stephen with a V.
I mean Amazing Spider-Man comics. Specifically, the run by Zeb Wells. And today we're going to be doing a Spider-Pop's review on one of the arcs in the Amazing Spider-Man comic run by Zeb Wells. And as you can see right here, we have Amazing Spider-Man number 25 and Amazing Spider-Man number 1. So it is going to be a very exciting video. Disclaimer right now though, if your name is Paul, anything said in this video is not directed at you. But now, with all the Pauls warned for today's video, make sure you guys stick around till the end. Alright, so like I said, today we are going to be going over specifically quite a few points in these specific comics and a few others in between in this Amazing Spider-Man run by Zeb Wells. If you guys have read this Amazing Spider-Man arc, you'll know that it gets pretty interesting. This is actually the first Amazing Spider-Man series that I actually was able to jump on board and actually got me into collecting Spider-Man comics, so I do have almost all of the current issues from this Amazing Spider-Man run, except for maybe 2 or 3 of them. But currently I have read up to issue 27. So in the comic line, we have recently just gotten a few questions resolved as to what has happened to our boy Peter Parker in this Amazing Spider-Man run. And contrary to what it says on the cover right here, what happened to Mary Jane, that's not really what's important here, okay? It's not. It's not. So we're going to start with Amazing Spider-Man number 1, where we do get introduced to our boy Peter Parker after he did just crash into a big ol' empty chunk of land. So we don't know where Peter is, we don't know why he's just fallen from the sky and is on the verge of death right now. All we know is that he's upset and that he needs to find a way to do something about his current situation. Flash forward in the same comic book, we see it's been a few months later, whatever has just happened with the crater has been resolved, and everybody in New York that knows Peter Parker and Spider-Man absolutely despise him. Peter Parker is going through the absolute ringer, I swear. And then later on in the comic, you do find out that he has been working with Norman Osborn, and I know what you guys are thinking. Norman Osborn, you don't want to be teaming up with that guy, but certain things have transpired. Norman Osborn is not controlled by the Goblin anymore, and he's trying to become his own man. So in doing that, he does give Peter his own opportunity at Oscorp, where Peter does work alongside with Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel. Don't worry, we'll touch on that in a later video. So in this Amazing Spider-Man line, you do see Peter go through a whole bunch of stuff with Tombstone, Black Cat, Ben Reilly, and a whole bunch of other wicked webtastic Spider-Man villains and side characters throughout the story. But the whole time, you really don't get an answer to why Peter Parker is so disliked by everybody in the Marvel Universe, until we get to Amazing Spider-Man number 25. Really 24, but we do actually get to see a bulk of what actually happened in issue 25 right here. But in this chunk of the story, we actually do go back to right before Peter actually did crash in the crater that we saw him in issue 1. And then we find out that Peter Parker was just doing his thing. They were looking at apartments, planning on moving in together, starting a new life. Peter Parker finally had it good. Until he didn't.
Everything Spider-Man touches comes to ruin.
And that's when we're introduced to a brand new villain known as Raven. Now, Raven is a villain that I was not too familiar with before actually reading this Amazing Spider-Man line, but we do come to find out that Raven is kind of a jerk. So, long story short, after getting into a whole scuffle with this dude, Peter Parker and MJ are sent to a whole nother universe that is basically imploding on itself. It is not in good shape. Anybody living in this universe is just, they're not having a good time right now, let me tell you. So Peter and MJ go through this whole thing. They're trying to get back to their universe, meanwhile trying to figure out what the deal is with this dude, Raven. And as they're going through this dimension, they stumble across, quite possibly, the worst character in all of Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man history.
Hi, I'm Paul!
Now when I say this man is the peak, the pinnacle of Goofy Goobers, I do not take that lightly. This man is a Goofy Goober to the highest degree. And a Goofy Goober such as that has to have one of the goofiest of Goofy Goober names known to man. That's right, I'm talking about Paul. Now let me tell you about Paul. Paul is somebody that all spider people everywhere need to be wary of. If you have a Paul in your life, you need to cut them off right now, especially if you're... Just kidding, all jokes aside, if your name is Paul out there, I'm sure you are a great guy, but Paul in The Amazing Spider-Man, I just can't get behind. Not my favorite, not in the slightest. We are first introduced to Paul as Peter Parker and MJ are trying to get back to their universe. Peter is currently working on a device to actually let them travel back to their universe. However, the plan with his device only allows them to take one of them back. So Spider-Man being Spider-Man, he's like, alright, no brainer, we're sending MJ back. I'll figure out another way to get back. So, Spider-Man crafts this device to allow them to travel between universes and get back to their home universe. And bam! Out of nowhere, Raven appears to mess everything up. Now this fight is something that Paul is not going to be crying about later on, because during this fight, Peter actually has the device finish, and as he's mid-fight, Raven just gets the upper hand on Peter. MJ decides to slap the teleporter onto Peter Parker and send him back to his home world. And as he's sent back to his home world, we actually do get flash forward back to Amazing Spider-Man #1, and we get to see him fall through the sky and crash into the ground, creating that crater that we saw in the first issue of Amazing Spider-Man. However, when Peter gets back, he realizes that he was transported to the exact same time that MJ and Peter were actually sent to that dimension in the first place, which means time moves differently in this realm. That means Peter's got to move fast, because as we find out, Peter and MJ had actually spent a whole week in that dimension, and when he came back, it was like no time had passed in the real world, which means time moves a lot faster in that other dimension. So if Peter's not quick, by the time he saves MJ, it could be hundreds of years too late. So Peter goes all around New York trying to get help as fast as possible to be able to get back to that dimension. Unfortunately, with the time limit put on him, he's not really able to get help by many of our beloved heroes, such as Captain America, the Fantastic Four. As a matter of fact, he actually puts the ringer to all 5 of those beloved heroes while he's trying to steal tech to actually be able to build a device to get back to save MJ. And after turning to all these heroes and being turned away, Peter turns to the only guy he has left to go to. One of his biggest foes, Norman Osborn.
I could go for a burrito.
And there is where we actually find out how Peter actually started working for Norman Osborn in the Amazing Spider-Man storyline, because Norman is one of those characters that is still willing to bend the rules a little bit. So after what is probably about a day, maybe 2 of him trying to scrounge up supplies, he finally has everything he needs to get back to that dimension. However, once he finally gets sent back, he's confronted right with the man, Raven, and MJ, and Paul. They're all there. It looks like Peter is brought just back to the moment from when he left. So good news, right? Wrong! When Peter gets back, he defeats Raven. Raven's gone for the meanwhile. And then Peter Parker, overwhelmed with joy, he did it. He got back to the woman he loved, Mary Jane Watson. So excited that he didn't mess it up and was actually able to save her. He goes in for the long-awaited kiss. But MJ pulls away. And we're all left flabbergasted. What? Why? Peter wasn't gone for that long, right? Couldn't have been that long. Well, unfortunately for our boy Peter Parker, in the course of that couple days that he spent gathering materials, it had been years in that dimension. And in the course of that time, Mary Jane had fallen in love with quite possibly the worst character ever, Paul. Just like that. That's exactly how it went. But absolutely just tough. It's just a tough time for for our boy Peter Parker. So Peter's left absolutely devastated after this, of course. They were literally about to move in with each other. They start having a conversation. MJ's like, no, I can't leave him, because Paul and MJ actually have kids.
Huh?
That's right. MJ moved on fast. So as we've already known since the first couple issues of Amazing Spider-Man, when we did see MJ with Paul and the kids, we finally find out where they actually came from. And fortunately enough, the kids are not actually what we all perceive them to be. I may touch on that in a later video, but we will have to see what they actually decide to do with those two characters if they do decide to bring them back in later comics. But throughout the whole Amazing Spider-Man run, we are led to believe that Peter Parker did something bad. He did something to cross MJ bad enough to where MJ left Peter and went for some other guy named Paul. Turns out that's absolute baloney. Turns out this is one of the few times in Spider-Man comic history where it's not Spider-Man's fault, it's MJ's fault. Because throughout this Amazing Spider-Man number 25, we get to see everything that MJ and Paul went through in that time gap that Peter was trying to actually gather the materials to save her. And here's where it gets really bad for me, folks. We see all the time jumps from when Peter's gone in that other dimension. You know how long it took MJ to move on from Peter Parker? 4 months.
Oh, I forgot. You're broken. I don't want to play with you anymore.
Within 4 months, we already got MJ calling Paul Tiger. Tiger! And don't even get me started on Paul's real backstory. Because let me tell you, Paul, you know, as great of a guy as he's made out to be. But yeah, Paul's definitely got some secrets that he's hiding when Peter actually does first get to see him. But we'll touch on that in a later video. But yeah, that's honestly my 2 cents on the whole Paul and Mary Jane storyline in The Amazing Spider-Man by Zeb Wells. I do know there are a lot of Spider-Man fans out there that are definitely not a fan of this certain part of the run just because of Paul right there. But honestly, if I'm being honest with myself, as upset as I am about Paul replacing Peter in MJ's life, who needs her, right? Who needs her? MJ is overrated anyways, if we're being honest. Because throughout the Amazing Spider-Man comic line, that's kind of what we're led to believe, because Spider-Man is starting to make a pretty decent life for himself. He's finally getting things to come together. He's starting to go on a few dates with Black Cat, which, honestly, I think Black Cat at this point is quite a bit better than MJ, if we're being honest. I mean, if we're switching scenarios, and then Black Cat gets stuck there with Paul, Black Cat might steal a few things, sure, but she's not getting with some dude named Paul.
I missed you. Glad we're back together again.
He is making it work, though. Like I said earlier in the video, it is a different point in Spider-Man's life where in this run he is kind of moving away. He is kind of growing apart a bit from MJ, and honestly, they're doing it in a better manner than I would say other runs have in the past. All of the big Amazing Spider-Man fans out there do know that at a certain point, Peter Parker was married to MJ and straight up got his marriage erased by Mephisto, who is basically the devil of the Marvel Universe. So there have been some goofier ways to get rid of the Peter Parker and MJ love story, but I honestly feel like in this way, it feels a little bit better, is a little bit easier for our boy Peter, because it really isn't anything that Peter did. Like, Peter did everything he could to get MJ back and save her from that other dimension. And even though he did all of that, it wasn't enough for MJ. And let this be a lesson to everybody out there. If that's not... If you're going after an MJ and saving her from a different dimension, and she leaves you for some dude named Paul, she was never good enough for you anyway, bro.
Man, I'm so relieved to hear you say that, bro.
If you're going to be leaving Spider-Man, the Spider-Man, after 4 months, when you know he's probably going to come save you, you deserve to be with a guy named Paul. You deserve each other. Let's be honest. But it's okay. Spider-Man's in a better place now. He's getting a good relationship going with Black Cat. Everything's going swell. I'm excited to see where that relationship actually goes within the storyline. And Miss Spider-Pops is a huge Black Cat fan, so she is pretty excited as well. But with all that being said, that is pretty much all we got to go over for today's Amazing Spider-Man Attack on Paul breakdown. Once again, I'm super excited to see how all the storylines in this Amazing Spider-Man run unfold. And I do hope you guys enjoyed this new type of Spider Pops video of us going over some Amazing Spider-Man comics as much as I did making it for all of you guys. I did have an absolute blast going over these comics and venting out a little bit of my Paul frustrations with all of you. And we will be having another Amazing Spider-Man comic video next week, going over another blockbuster Amazing Spider-Man comic from this Zeb Wells Amazing Spider-Man line, The Amazing Spider-Man number 26. So, you definitely don't want to miss out. If you guys enjoyed today's comic book video, definitely make sure you guys subscribe to the channel with bell notifications turned on so you don't miss out on any of our future webtastic content. I hope you guys all have a webtastic and magical rest of your day. And that's going to do it for today's day 2 of Spider Pop's 25 Days of Christmas, Season 4. We'll see you guys tomorrow for day 3. It's sure to be wicked webtastic, but that's going to do it. So make sure you guys are staying safe out there, staying frosty, and having fun, of course. Have an amazing rest of your day, webheads. Bye-bye. Bet you Paul couldn't do that. I'm cooler than Paul. Stupid Paul.